This Sabbath, I want to tell a story of some forgotten history. So, if you don't like history, I can't help you. But this is about how God protects people he will work with. The title for today is God's Protection. Anyone here who know what president was born in 1732? No? Oh, he doesn't. Okay. Any young guys out there? No. His name was George Washington. Can't believe nobody knows that. I think I knew that many years ago when I was in school. But there was a title for Mr. Washington. He was called the Bulletproof President. Anybody hear of that? Oh, we have. I didn't think there'd be that many people here that knew that, because I didn't know it until about 2 months ago. So that's why it gave me this to work with. At one time, this story of God's divine protection of George Washington could be found in virtually all school textbooks. Now today, very few Americans have read the story and know about it because it is not found in the school books textbooks. So today we will have a history lesson. This story shows how God works in our world. Without God's intervention, George Washington may never have lived to be the father of our country. Washington often told others about this life-changing event that influenced the man he became, and he affirmed God's plan for his life. George Washington began his military career in 53 in some books, when he was in his early 20s. He began not as a private, but as a major. Now, anybody in the military, he skipped second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, and went right to major. And that was in the militia of Virginia. He was later promoted to full bird colonel in a year or so. That's quite a jump. I mean, it's just amazing. But at that time, the British colonists had settled the eastern seaboard and claimed all the lands to the west. The French settled in Canada and in Louisiana, and they also claimed all the land in the west. And this created the conflict between the British and the French and resulted in the French and Indian War. The French made plans to build a series of forts on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, stretching from Canada to New Orleans. This action would block the British colonies from access to the West and make it possible for the French to colonize the area. The governor at the time, Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia, he commissioned George Washington as an ambassador and sent him with a letter to the French telling them to cease their plans. Possibly that's not going to work. But Washington went and met with the French at Fort Duquesne, which later was renamed Fort Pitt, which is now the site of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Washington was unsuccessful in his efforts, and the French pushed forward with building the forts. To protect their interests, the British sent approximately 1,000 battle-hardened troops to Virginia and put British General Braddock in charge. Braddock wanted the help of the colonists, so he appointed George Washington as his chief aide and honored his rank of colonel. Virginia provided another 300 troops, making a total of 1,300 men under Braddock's command. With the help of Benjamin Franklin was involved in practically everything that happened in the United States in its early days. Amazing. He provided money, horses, wagons, cannons, and supplies, which they all used to go to Fort Duquesne. Braddock and Washington led the troops and trekked several hundred miles through the forests, and they built roads as they proceeded to the fort. Braddock was used out in the open style of warfare waged in Europe, which meant they just stood in the field, fired forward, and of course got shot at. Washington warned him that the Indians, the allies of the French, fought ambush style and shielded themselves behind trees. General Braddock wouldn't listen. Twice he refused to believe this same warning from the Indians who were friendly to the British. He was so rude to them that they just tried and gave up. So Braddock's army stood in their bright red British uniforms, shoulder to shoulder, out in the open, completely exposed to the enemy. They were sitting ducks. When shots were leveled at them from the forest, they dropped. The French and Indians suffered only minimal casualties, but the general's army suffered near annihilation. General Braddock himself was also killed. When they came under fire, the British troops did exactly what they had been taught. They lined up, shoulder to shoulder, in the bottom of a ravine. Brilliant. And were slaughtered. At the end of 2 hours, 714 of the 1,300 British and American troops had been shot down. Only 30 of the French and Indians had been shot. The hostile Indian marksmen continued to shoot at the mounted British officers and singled out Washington as a target. This is where it gets interesting. One of the chiefs of the Indians said, "Quick, let your aim be certain," and he dies. The warriors aimed their rifles at George Washington, who was on horseback, and shot round after round at him, and Washington remained unhurt. There were 86 British and American officers involved in that battle. At the end of the battle, George Washington was the only officer who had not been shot down off his horse. He was the only officer left on horseback. The native warriors stared at the scene in disbelief. Their rifles seldom missed their mark. The chief suddenly realized that a mighty power must be shielding this man, and told his warriors to stop firing. "You're wasting your ammunition," at Washington. As the firing slowed, Washington gathered the few remaining troops and led the retreat to safety. That evening, as the last of the wounded were being cared for, Washington noticed an odd tear in his coat. It was a bullet hole. He rolled up his sleeve and looked at his arm directly under the hole. There was no mark on his skin. Amazed, he took off his coat and found 3 more holes where bullets had passed through his coat but stopped before they reached his body. 9 days after the battle, after hearing the rumor circulating about his death, because 85 of the 86 guys had died, Washington wrote his brother John to confirm that he was still very much alive. Here's part of his letter. He said to his brother, "As I have heard since my arrival at this place a circumstantial account of my death and dying speech, I take this early opportunity of contradicting the first and of assuring you that I have not yet composed the latter. But by all powerful dispensations," let me get to my next page, "of Providence, I have been protected beyond all human probability or expectation. For I had 4 bullets through my coat. 2 horses were shot from under me, and yet I escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side of me." If you would, please turn to Psalm 91 and verse 7. Psalm 91 and verse 7. We've all read this before. We've heard it before. A thousand may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. The events that occurred around Colonel Washington at that time, that day, during the battle, provided compelling proof that he was in God's care and survived due to the Lord's direct intervention on his behalf. One of the Indian warriors who had been a leader in the battle was heard later to relate the events of that day. "Washington," he says, "was never born to be killed by a bullet. I had numerous fair fire at him with my rifle, and after all, I could not bring him to the ground." These guys were marksmen. However, the story doesn't stop there. 15 years later, in 1770, at this time it's peaceful between the French and the British, George Washington and a close personal friend, Dr. James Craik, C-R-A-I-K, I could be pronouncing that wrong, returned to those same Pennsylvania woods. An old Indian chief from far away, having heard that Washington had come back to those woods, traveled a long way just to meet with him. He said, and this is before he met George Washington that day, he said, "Listen, the Great Spirit protects that man," meaning Washington, "and guides his destinies. He will become the chief of nations, and a people yet unborn will hail him as the founder of a mighty nation. I am come to pay homage to the man who is the particular favorite of heaven and who can never die in battle." Think God was working with Mr. Washington? The chief sat down with Washington face to face over a council fire. The chief told Washington that he had been a leader in that battle 15 years earlier, and that he instructed his braves to single out all the officers and shoot them down. All the officers were on horseback. They're up in the air. It's easy to shoot them, even though they're moving a little bit. Washington had been singled out, and the chief explained that he personally had shot at Washington 17 different times, but without effect. Believing Washington to be under the care of the Great Spirit, the chief instructed his braves to cease firing at him. George Washington not only survived the battle in 1775, but was not even wounded. And he fought many other battles as well in his lifetime, but was never wounded in any of them. If you would, you all have your hymnals. If you could turn to hymn number 143. You know what? Can I get my phone, please? Because I didn't bring a hymnal up with me. Oh, okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hymn number 143. A few years ago, I was in a gunfight, and that Sabbath, this song was sung. Hymn 143 is very important to me. And I'm just going to read a few lines here. First line, "Be not afraid, my people. I am your God who watches over you. I do not sleep, and neither will I slumber. Sons, be not afraid of man, be not afraid. What can man do to those whom I love so? What can man do to those who fear my name?